On Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, Australian Federal Police escorted a man through Sydney Airport. The news footage is deliberately blurred, but you can't mistake the sheer presence of the man in the frame. That man was Ben Robert Smith, Australia's most decorated living soldier, a recipient of the Victoria Cross. Look, this wasn't some minor charge. He was formally accused of the war crime of murder. So the question is immediate. How does a man once revered as a national symbol, a near-mythical hero, end up in handcuffs? How does that story even happen? To understand how a god falls, you must first understand how a nation builds one. So, how does a nation build a god? Look, it starts with a need. A vacuum. By 2010, Australia was bogged down in its longest, most brutal war. A conflict in Afghanistan that felt distant, grinding, and without a clear victory on the horizon. The public needed a story to believe in. The politicians needed a distraction. The army needed a hero to justify the cost. And in the dust of Kandahar province, they found one. His name was Ben Robert Smith, and his legend was forged in fire on a single day, June 11th, 2000. The scene is a village called Tizak. An SAS patrol is pinned down, completely exposed. They are being chewed apart by heavy fire from multiple Taliban machine gun positions. They are trapped. They are facing being overrun. The air is just thick with lead. And then he moves. Alone. Ben Robert Smith, a 6'7" giant, deliberately charges forward, straight into the teeth of the gunfire. He is a magnet for every round, drawing all of it, every single bullet, onto himself to give his men a sliver of a chance. He single-handedly storms not one, not two, but 3 separate machine gun nests, silencing the crews. The enemy themselves were in awe. The Taliban, they reportedly had a name for him, the big soldier with the blue eyes. For this action, he was awarded the Victoria Cross for Australia, the nation's highest military honour. The official citation read like a screenplay, praising his most conspicuous gallantry and extreme devotion to duty in the face of the enemy. But this was more than a medal. This was a coronation, a deliberate act of national myth-making. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was the Anzac spirit made flesh, the perfect hero for an imperfect war, a giant to carry the story. He was the perfect symbol, a 6'7" giant built for a myth. But the war Australia was sold was not the war being fought. By 2012, the war in Afghanistan had turned toxic. The fight had devolved from clear missions into a series of grinding village-to-village raids where trust was a currency that no longer existed. The lines were blurring, and the ultimate betrayal came from inside the wire. Look, imagine it. August 2012. Patrol Base Wahab. A moment of quiet in the dust and heat. A few Australian soldiers are off duty playing cards with their Afghan partners. It's relaxed. It's normal. And then one of the Afghan soldiers, a sergeant named Hekmatullah, stands up, raises his rifle, and opens fire on the men sitting right beside him. In an instant, the air is torn apart. Lance Corporal Stjepan Milosevic, Sapper James Martin, and Private Robert Pote are murdered. 2 others are wounded, killed not by a hidden bomb or a distant sniper, but by an ally, in cold blood. That one event, and others just like it, shattered everything. It injected a deep and corrosive paranoia into the very soul of the mission. Every interaction, every patrol, every face was now a potential threat. Who was friend? Who was foe? The distinction dissolved into a bloody haze. This was the cauldron, a place where morality was boiled away, where the certainties they'd arrived with were systematically burned to ash. In this cauldron, the hero myth itself began to fracture, and the very first crack appeared in a small, dusty village called Whiskey 108, with a man who had a prosthetic leg. The raid on the compound, codenamed Whiskey 108, was over. The gunfire had stopped. In that quiet courtyard, the soldiers began the search, and there, hidden in a tunnel, they found 2 Afghan men. They were unarmed. They were now prisoners. One of them had a prosthetic leg, a plastic and metal limb, a sign of a life already scarred by this war. What happened next was not an act of combat. It wasn't the heat of battle. The Federal Court of Australia would later examine the evidence for days and find it substantially true that Ben Roberts-Smith, the hero, looked at a rookie soldier, pointed to one of the helpless prisoners, and ordered him to execute the man. An unlawful killing. But it didn't end there. Roberts-Smith then turned his attention to the second man. The man with the prosthetic leg. He was shot and killed. The judge found that Ben Roberts-Smith himself was responsible for that murder. And then something else happened, an act that tells you more than any medal ever could. The prosthetic leg was unstrapped from the dead man's body and taken back to the Australian base, Salerno. It was a trophy. Witnesses, whose testimony the judge accepted as fact, described how soldiers, including Ben Roberts-Smith, use it as a drinking vessel. They poured beer into it, and they drank. The hero myth, the story we tell ourselves about our best and bravest, had just collided with an ugly, undeniable truth. But this wasn't an isolated act of battlefield rage. This was becoming a system, a method. And the next killing would be used to prove that the method worked. That proof came in a village called Darwan in 2012. The method was about to be tested on a farmer named Ali Jan. He was taken prisoner during a raid. He was unarmed. According to the other soldiers who were there, he was marched to the edge of a steep cliff. And then Ben Roberts-Smith kicked him off. But Ali Jan didn't die from the fall. At the bottom of that cliff, broken and bleeding, he was still alive. So they dragged him from the rocks into a nearby cornfield and shot him dead. Then came the final, crucial step of the method. A small radio, a throwdown, was planted on his body. The official story would be that they had engaged and killed an enemy spotter. But the murder of a farmer was erased and replaced by a legitimate kill, a cleanup. Look, when this evidence was presented in court, Ben Roberts-Smith denied all of it. He lied. That's not my word. That is the exact word used by the judge. After weighing all the testimony, Justice Besenko's federal court ruling found the story of Ali Jan being kicked off a cliff and murdered to be substantially true. The cover-up proves everything. The throwdown radio tells you this wasn't about the fog of war. This was murder, followed by a calculated process designed to guarantee impunity. This was the method in action. But to understand the mindset that makes a method like this possible, the psychology that allows you to look at a human being and see only an object to be discarded, we have to listen to another soldier who fought in that same war. A soldier from a very different world. A royal soldier. Prince Harry. In his memoir, Spare, Prince Harry wrote about his time as an Apache helicopter pilot in that same war. He wrote, "My number is 25. It's not a number that fills me with satisfaction, but nor does it embarrass me. In the era of Apaches and laptops, I was able to see him with absolute clarity, as chess pieces removed from the board." Chess pieces. This is what they don't tell you. They sell you the hero, but they hide the cost of turning a man into a weapon. To operate in that environment, you are trained to see the enemy not as a person, but as an object, a target, a problem to be removed from the board. It's the psychological mechanism that allows the myth of the clean war to exist. But what happens when that mechanism stops being a tool for survival and starts being a tool for corruption within the unit itself? It gets a name. It becomes a ritual. And within certain patrols of the Australian SAS, they called it blooding. This is where the story turns from individual crimes to a systemic rot. The court found it was true that Ben Roberts-Smith ordered a junior soldier to execute an unarmed Afghan prisoner. This wasn't a tactical decision made in the heat of battle. This was a dark initiation. It was to give the rookie his first kill, binding him forever to the unit's brutal code of violence and silence. Look, this isn't just a rumour from the barracks. This is a documented corrupting practice. The Brereton report, the result of a 4-year-long official inquiry, confirmed it. The federal court confirmed it. It was the most brutal, ritualised form of that chess piece mentality. It was policy. The whispers of this rot, of men being treated like pawns in someone else's brutal game, had finally escaped the battlefield. The truth was in the open. And in a move of stunning hubris, believing his own myth could protect him, Australia's greatest living soldier made his single biggest mistake. He decided to sue. For years, it was just whispers, rumours in the barracks, stories shared in the dark. Then came the reckoning. It began with a military lawyer, David McBride, a man who decided the truth was worth more than his career, more than his freedom. He leaked a trove of classified documents, not for fame, not for money, but to expose what he saw as a systemic effort to bury the dark realities of the war. Those leaks found their way to the ABC, and in 2017, they detonated in the public square as the Afghan Files. The secret was out. The whispers were now a national headline. And in the face of this, Ben Robert Smith made his final, fatal calculation. He believed he could use the legal system as one last weapon. He sued the newspapers for defamation, aiming to restore his honour in court, to silence the noise, and to rebuild the myth the journalist had shattered. It was the biggest gamble of his life. And it was his undoing. The trial backfired, spectacularly. The witness box he thought would be his stage for vindication became a platform for his former comrades. One by one, soldiers who had served with him, men bound by an unspoken code, walked into court and testified against him, under oath. The very silence his myth was built on was broken by the men who knew the truth. Then, in June 2023, the climax, the moment the entire nation had been watching. In a 726-page judgment, Justice Anthony Basenko delivered the final verdict. He dismissed the lawsuit. He declared the newspapers had proven their allegations to be substantially true. True that he had committed murder. True that he had bullied his fellow soldiers. The judge was even more direct. He stated that Ben Robert Smith was a man who has been exposed as a person who has broken the moral and legal rules of military engagement. A man who disgraced his country. The man who sued to save his reputation had it publicly and legally destroyed by his own actions. The myth was officially dead. Look, if you think this story is just about one soldier, you haven't been paying attention. Because the system that built him into a myth to sell a war is the exact same system that built another, much bigger myth. The one they sold to you about your own life. That other myth? The one they sold to you? It has a name. The Aussie Dream. The promise that a house, a mortgage, and hard work would guarantee your security. This story was never just about Ben Robert Smith. His downfall was the moment one broken myth exposed the cracks in them all. Sociological studies show this is what happens when a national legend collapses. It doesn't just challenge a story, it destabilizes a society's very identity and leaves its citizens feeling psychologically adrift. Look, the government knows the scale of this disaster. They've already allocated over $318 million for the Office of the Special Investigator. That isn't the cost of justice. That's the price tag for a national level cleanup, because the problem was national level. This pattern of institutional myth-making, followed by systemic betrayal, should feel deeply familiar. The same system that built the Anzac legend, only to see it crumble under ugly, unavoidable truths, is the one that sold you the Aussie Dream. So, for a generation now drowning in debt, crushed by a cost of living crisis, the feeling is identical. It's that slow, dawning horror when you realize the game was rigged. You can almost hear the quiet thought, they sold us the Aussie Dream, but delivered the mortgage trap. Where's the fair go we were promised? Let me be clear, this is not your personal failure. It is a systemic betrayal, the Anzac myth. The Aussie Dream, two broken promises from the exact same machine. So, what is the final uncomfortable truth that connects them? And once you see it, how can you ever trust the official story again? Look, the final uncomfortable truth of the Ben Robert Smith saga is this. This was never a story about one hero's fall from grace. It's a story about what happens when a nation mythologizes war, and is then forced to confront the brutal fact that war is always uglier than the myths it sells itself. Think about the logic here. As one writer put it, if a country sends a man to a dirty war, rewards him for his aggression, and praises the results he brings, it cannot then act shocked when the ugliness comes with it. That isn't a surprise. That's a consequence. The real, lasting damage from all this isn't to one man's reputation. It's a permanent corrosion of our trust. The BRS case has fundamentally altered how Australians view their institutions. Research shows that when foundational myths like this are shattered, they create a lasting skepticism toward all state-promoted narratives. After this, how can you ever fully trust the official story again? From the military all the way to the Reserve Bank, the stories our institutions tell us matter. If you believe holding them to account is crucial, subscribe to this channel and share this video. It's how we fight back against the myths.